Alright, it's recording now.
Alright. Welcome everyone! Welcome to the very first Living Room Talks. So part of the goal of Living Room Talks is so that people can feel connected with each other in a sort of a different way. So I know everyone's seeing one of you guys personally, and there's something really interesting about each one of you guys. And part of it is, sometimes without asking the right questions, those things don't kind of get put to the forefront, right? So part of it is that by sharing just things that we're passionate about, hopefully we can get to know each other in a deeper way. So part of the thing I started presenting about is, so I wanted to present about how I got into investing. So here's a book that I read a couple years ago by David Swensen. Do you guys know who he is? So David Swensen is sort of the Warren Buffett of the endowment world. So big endowments like, let's say, like Harvard or Yale or Stanford, they have like this huge amount of like cash that they hold. And part of what they do is that a huge part of their income comes from their investments, right? So if you look at, let's say, Harvard, they have probably like $35 billion, and I think they average probably like 14% per year on their return for something like the last 30 years. And if you look at Yale, just kind of depending on the time slice that you actually look at it, like Yale actually has the #1 like fastest growing endowment. So David Swensen, he was hired by Yale in 1985 to manage their portfolio, which at the time I think was about $1 billion. And he grew it to about, I think last I checked, 2017 was like $27 billion. So it's a ridiculous return. It's probably like, I don't know how much it is, but probably like 17% per year, like compounded, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to understand about investing is, have you guys ever read books about investing, like just for the average person, right? Like, what's like the most common advice that you hear?
Index funds.
ETFs. Diversification. Okay. Yeah. So basically, most books are about don't pick stocks, buy some kind of ETF, and just hold it for the long term, right? And granted, I think that's actually the best advice for most people. But the problem with that advice is that it doesn't actually encourage learning. And so when I read that advice, the advice is basically, hey, there are a lot of really smart people doing this, you probably shouldn't try. Right? Which, statistically speaking, that's probably actually pretty accurate. I mean, that's actually good advice for 99% of people. Yeah, but Ruby, come here. Here, let me Ruby, come here. Come on, touch.
What's your skateboard?
Yeah, so anyways, so I wanted to understand not just how retail investors invest. I wanted to understand basically how big universities, how big endowments like invest, right? Because I read this really good book called The Art of Learning by was it Joshua Waitzkin? And so part of what he says is that when he learns chess, he studies the end game first, right? And so like a lot of people might study chess from the very beginning, but if you actually study the end game, you can actually sort of like extrapolate a lot of useful principles from that, right? And I think it's the same thing with like learning just about anything. And so one thing I wanted to do was like, instead of just reading books on how like a person like myself could invest, I wanted to understand like if you have $35 billion, like how do you invest, right? And if they're not, so if these universities are not just buying S&P 500 and holding it for 30 years, then why are they not doing that, right? So I think that's a really important question to understand. So anyways, I picked up this book, Pioneering Portfolio Management, which is for endowments, right? And it's a really, really cool book. I mean, like, half the book is more or less irrelevant to me, but but it's still really interesting. I mean, like, they sort of like document like how like their spending algorithm. For example, like if they have a certain return every single year, like some universities will just spend whatever they earn in that year, right? But then if they plan it so that they're like averaging across the last 5 years or something, then their spending can sort of like, ramp up or ramp down depending. So anyways, what's really interesting about David Swensen is that back in 1985, the most common wisdom at the time was that you would hold like a portfolio of, let's say, public stocks and bonds, right? So at the time they had something like 60% stocks, 40% bonds, right? So he took a look at this portfolio and he thought about it. He was like, okay, this actually doesn't make very much sense for a university. because universities have a time horizon of, let's say, like 100 years or more, right? And so, theoretically in the public stock market, you're paying a premium for the extra advantage of liquidity, right? And when you start investing in, let's say, illiquid assets, right? Theoretically, there's some disadvantage because it's not liquid, and so you get paid for that disadvantage, right? And so he took that portfolio and he actually made it into 90% illiquid assets. So if you look at the illiquid alternative assets, so if you actually look at the portfolio today, so I checked back when I read this book, right? I checked in like 2005 or 2006. And I was really surprised to see that they had something like a third of the entire portfolio in real assets. So specifically real estate, oil and gas, timberland, right? So timberland is a really interesting line item. Like it really just caught my eye. I was like, really? Like these universities hold like acres, like hundreds of acres or thousands of acres of land and just like plant trees. This is amazing, right? And so if you look at the portfolio today, it's something like 35% absolute return fund. So absolute return is basically this sort of like market neutral type trading. Did you guys know what I mean by market neutral?
No.
So basically what it means is, so market neutral would be like you're using longs and you're using shorts, right? So an example of market neutral would be like, let's say I think that Walmart is going to do really bad compared to Amazon, right, in the next 10 years, right? But consumer like spending in general, let's say, is trending upwards, right? So like, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? And so a market neutral way to trade against this idea that Walmart is going to do worse compared to Amazon would be to go long for Amazon and then to go short something like Walmart, right? And so what you're doing there is you're basically just capturing the differential, right? So like if the entire market is going up, then because you are shorting Walmart, but you're also long Amazon, you're not going to get killed on that trade, right? So these are kind of like market neutral type event-based trading, right? And so I was pretty surprised to see like, holy crap, like they hold 30% or more of their portfolio in something like, essentially it's just like short-term trading, or at least like event-based market trading, right? But then the rest of their portfolio is in things like, venture capital, it's in private equity, it's in real estate, so they own a bunch of, they own a bunch of like institutional grade type real estate, right? So anyways, that line item, like timberland, really just stood out for me. And so last year I actually went to a timberland conference. It was this 3-day conference out in Georgia. And I'm pretty sure I was the only minority there. I think I was the only one like under 50 years old. Like the only way I could have stood out more is if I was like an Asian girl. But it was awesome. There's like this whole panel of like, PhDs in forestry and like, and actually behind you is like a lot of the handouts from there. And yeah, I got to visit a bunch of the timber farms that they had out there. So UGA does a lot of research on like basically what makes timber grow really well, right? So like, so I've learned a lot. Like for example, like since the 1900s, there's actually double the number of trees there are in Georgia today. Sorry, there are double the number of trees today as there was in the 1900s. And also we've doubled our production of trees every 20 years since the 1900s, which is actually really interesting too. So if you look at some of their studies, they literally have these plots of land where they're like A/B testing, like the genetics of different trees. So they're testing like, okay, like if we clone these trees and like have plot A, plot B, which one goes faster? And these are like literally 25-year studies, right? And so like I'm standing there looking at a study that was started in like the 1980s, like looking at the evidence of it, right? And there's a lot of considerations. For example, like they experiment with the spacing of trees. So let's say like if you plant trees equally spaced apart, like in terms of like a square, like a perfect grid, right? Is that better than, let's say, planting where you're having 6 feet apart and 3 feet apart, right? And they found that it grows almost the same, right? And so if it's the same, then it's actually better to arrange them in a rectangle, right? Mm-hmm. Because then you create these bigger paths for like these huge machines to be able to come through and like harvest, right? Or they did experiments where they doubled the number of densities of trees, and then one where it's just it's like half the density, right? And they did a study on like which one yields the most timber, right? And it turns out that economically it actually works out to be the same, but you produce different kinds of grades of timber.
Yeah.
Right. So the timber market is really interesting. So so there are a couple of products that you can create from timber. So the first lowest is called pulpwood. So this is so pulpwood would be it would be like your dead branches and leaves and whatever you want to throw in there, and it goes through basically a chipper, or maybe it's called a pulper, I don't know. But it runs through a chipper, and then you create this biomass that you can end up selling to. You can sell it to gardens. You can sell it as fuel. There's actually a whole biomass market that actually affects the price of some of this stuff. And then there's chip and saw, which is a little bit higher quality. It's basically branches. You run it through a chipper, and then you sell it to playgrounds and stuff like that. Yeah. And then you have saw timber. And so so basically you have pulpwood, chip and saw, chipped and. What did I say? Chip and saw, right? Yeah. Saw timber, veneer, poles, right? So the price of some of this stuff is, for example, for veneer, which is the highest quality wood, right? Mm-hmm. You can sell that for, let's say, $45 a ton. Yeah. For poles, you can sell it for let's say, $35 a ton. Saw timber, $25 a ton. Pulpwood would be $10 per ton, right? So let me show you some videos of so I went to this conference. And then what I realized is that my dad actually owns a lot of land in Georgia. So it's almost 1,000 acres. It's about the size of Golden Gate Park. And back when he bought it, have you guys ever read The Good Earth by Pearl's Buck? No? Okay. It's a book about, it's a book basically about a farmer that goes from from really poor to being really rich. And part of it is that he just held land, right? And he worked the land. So I think a lot of Asians that move here, it's a very Asian mentality to just buy land and hold it, right? But the thing is, my dad retired recently, but he never really thought about cash flow on this land, right? And so I started helping him manage his assets a couple years ago. And I was just thinking about this huge chunk of value that just wasn't generating anything, mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, you could get a loan on it and then invest that loan into real estate here. I was just trying to think about how to create cash flow on this, and when I read this book, it just sort of like light bulb moment. Right? I realized that actually this land is very productive. You can actually create equity-like returns on this land. So someone like Yale actually gets something 10 to 14% on their timber. So anyways, let me show you. And so the way, this is.
How does that return come? Is it new growth they sell?
Yeah. Okay. So in the book I read that, so in Swenson's book he says that 6 to 8% of the growth of that return comes from just the natural growth of trees, right? Mm-hmm. Right? So it's trees don't care whether the stock market crashed, they don't care if Trump got elected, they're just going to keep growing at 6 to 8% a year, right? And of course it follows an S curve, so it's like a teenager, right? There's a teenage years when they're growing really fast, and then eventually they'll keep growing actually even past 30 years. But if you want to maximize economic value, you typically harvest around 25 to 30 years. Oh, wow. So it depends on the genetics that you use. If you're using the latest genetics, it's 25-year cycle, mm-hmm. right? So what a lot of these guys do is that they'll have, let's say, 1,000 acres, split into 100, let's say 100-acre chunks, and then you can kind of think of it almost like a what do you call it? What's that term called where you're investing slowly over time?
Dollar cost averaging.
Dollar cost averaging, yeah. It's basically dollar cost averaging for timber. Right?
Find it.
And the thing is, timber is also very tax advantaged. So it has a lot of the same advantages as real estate. You can actually 1031 exchange. Oh, wow. So if you're so if you're selling a certain plot of land, you can 1031 exchange into a bigger plot. I think obviously all the timber that you sell is going to be long-term capital gains. Unless you're using some crazy miracle growth.
Less than 1 year tree.
1 year baby trees.
HGH trees.
Yeah.
What's a 1031 exchange?
1031 exchange is so it's a tax law in the U.S. where you can defer taxes of your capital gains in real estate. Right. So let's say I buy this house for $1 million, right? And let's say next year it goes to 1.5 million, right? So there's a $500,000 increase, right? So what I can do is I can sell this, if I were to just sell this place, I would get taxed on, let's say, $500,000, right? But if I did a 1030 exchange and I bought something of equal value, then I can defer those taxes and just not pay it until a later time.
Of like
Until you sell the next
of like the asset has to be of like
you could kind of perpetually
keep it as
buying properties
Yeah.
with
two
sell
main
options.
Yeah, and the idea is basically you could just keep deferring.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, to that note, like what a lot of wealthy people typically do is, I think, let's say I 1030 exchange this place 1.5, and eventually, so the tax basis is $1 million. But let's say, I don't know, like 50 years from now, I'm like 1030 exchanging up to like many million, like 10 million or something, right? Well, I think after that, if I were to die, then the tax basis gets reset for your children.
Exactly.
Right. So it's essentially that's one of the biggest tax loopholes for the wealthy. Yeah. So this is I'll show you a video of. Yeah. So this is like a tree farm that I actually went to go look at. Actually, I went to go look at a lot of tree farms, but this is one of them.
Where is this one?
So this one is near Athens, Georgia.
Okay.
It's beautiful. Like it's actually like amazing to be in the middle of all this stuff. Because I grew up in Georgia, so.
You weren't kidding about being the only minority.
Yeah. You should have worn a camouflage hat.
Yeah. So like
the sheet, the white sheet.
Yeah, there's different sheets. Like so, this one, every single one, they just show you like, okay, how many seedlings per acre, what's the spacing arrangement, and they basically show you. These are basically tests. These are all like plots of land that they test for UGA. 13 years, they're huge for 13 years. So they have, what is it, like 12 more years until you harvest. But so some of the plots are like a little bit smaller, some are, much larger. And also they'll show you some of the defects, right? Mm-hmm. So this particular species is called loblolly. It's a kind of, so for pine, there's a bunch of different species, but the one in Georgia, specifically the one close to me, is called loblolly, right? And so the characteristic of these pine is that there's a lot of like really small branches here. Mm-hmm. And so like the most ideal, tree is essentially a tree that has a huge trunk and basically no branches until the very top. Mm-hmm. That's what you want, right? That's where you get the best timber. Or you get just these really small, these small branches, right?
So when you're selling these plots of land, which I'm assuming sometimes they do, just as part of the natural investment process, is it better, will they get more money right at the end cycle or kind of in the middle? Is there a time when it's best to sell them, or is it,
you mean like in terms of maximizing the value? Maximize the value definitely to hold it till maturity. Yeah. So that's definitely the most.
There's less risk involved with like what could go wrong with the trees or with the timber.
Yeah, and also just because like pulpwood, you just get a lot less for that.
Do people, so you're saying after 25 years, they sell the entire plot, or do they harvest and sell the wood?
They harvest it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
I was just more curious
I'm
if
sure-
they did decide to sell, not that that's like what they do, but
I see.
I mean, you can do both basically. I mean, it depends on how it's kind of like when you're underwriting or when you're evaluating a piece of land, right? There are many considerations, right? Like, so if you're selling to someone who doesn't care about the timber, right? It's possible they can actually overlook it, right? There's this, there's actually, in fact, I mean, my dad probably overlooked it, to be completely honest, right? Because he wasn't looking for timber production, right? He was just looking for land that was beautiful that he can enjoy, right? So there's actually this, have you guys ever seen this movie called, what is it called? There Will Be Blood?
Yeah.
You seen it? Okay. Do you know that?
Milkshake.
Yes, so this movie is awesome. It's actually about, it's actually about like the oil, like during the oil boom, right? And like, it's this like oil tycoon. But he actually goes, so there's this one scene that I actually really like. So he goes over to this like quail like farm. He goes over to this farmer's land, right? And he's like dressed as like this like quail hunter, right? He goes to his land. He's like, yeah, we're here to hunt quail and just have just find a peaceful place to like retire for my son, right? And of course he's an oil tycoon, right? And he knows there's oil there. And so he goes to and so there's a scene where he's like sitting with his son, and his son's like, so how much are you gonna offer for this land, right? And he sits there and he says, well, we're not gonna give him oil prices. We're gonna give him quail prices, right? And so I'm sure obviously land, real estate is not completely efficient, right? So depending on how, like if you see the world in a different way in terms of the value of some of the stuff, then you're going to see a different value, right? I mean, beyond just timber, you also have mineral rights, you have hunting rights. There's actually a lot of different, there's a lot of sub-markets. So if you're planting longleaf pine, these are the pine that actually give off like pine needles, right? It's like if you ever go to like a longleaf pine farm, which I have, it's in Florida. I can show you a picture of it. A is that those trees are actually even more beautiful. Like there are literally no like branches at all until the very top, and it just like sprawls from the top, right? And at the bottom is all these pine trees, so it's just like it's all this like fallen pine, and it's just like really beautiful to be there. Yeah, so okay, so I'll show you some more videos.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
What kind of upkeep or maintenance do they need to perform to keep those trees growing optimally?
Yeah. Okay. So usually there's what they call a management cut, right? So like on my dad's land currently, that's what we're doing. We're not actually doing any kind of clear cutting yet. So clear cutting would be like we're cutting like many acres of land like completely, right? So what we're doing is we're going around and we're essentially cutting the ugly trees. You know, so the trees that you don't want is stuff that like bifurcates from the middle. You can tell some trees are diseased. They're not completely straight. They're kind of crooked. You know, they're over 20 years they've just been susceptible to diseases, right? So you're looking for basically like the Yao Ming of trees. You're looking for like a model tree, right? So what they do is they actually go to the forest and they like let's say you hire like a guy that does like pulpwood, right? He'll bring out these big machines and they'll go and they'll selectively cut the ones that are basically pulpwood, right? And it requires some management. Also the thing about this is that you hire a forester, right? So they're kind of like the real estate agent for timber, right? So in our case, I think we're paying something like 8% gross revenue, right, for them to manage this whole process. And there are a bunch of different parties involved. You have the mills. So let's say you have this plot of land, right? What determines the price of a lot of your trees is actually like how close the mills are to you, right? So there's a bunch of mills. So let's say like there's 3 mills in your area. You can sell to different mills, and depending on how far, it affects the profitability of your
trucking costs.
Exactly, yeah. So there's the mills, there's the truckers, there's the loggers, there's the forester, and there's the landowner, right? So there's usually actually at least 5 parties involved, and they all have different interests, right? And so the forester's job is basically to align the interests of all 5 parties, right? So what's interesting is that hardwood, if you think about hardwood, right, it takes a lot longer to grow. It's a higher quality wood. You would think that it's actually a lot more valuable than pine, right? But because there's actually not really any hardwood mills around this area, hardwood actually goes for even cheaper sometimes than pine, right? Which is strange to me, but that's how it works. Because there's just supply and demand, right? And there are a lot of other considerations, like whether you harvest in the winter, whether you harvest in the summer. Sometimes during rainy seasons, right? Like these mills, they're like, oh, well, it's been raining and they've been soaking up all this water, and now you have a heavy log. Well, what's up with that, right? So like I think they'll like kind of adjust prices based on some of this stuff. But I mean, in terms of the price of timber, like it gets affected by a lot of things. Like there are a couple sub-markets, right? Like you have the biomass market, which is the energy market, right? But then you have also like renovation and housing, right? So timber very closely follows the real estate market as well. But then you have international international interests that also affect the price. So China actually recently banned all logging from China. Like they're actually the #1 importer of timber now. Yeah. So when I was out in Georgia, I met some people who that's their business. Like they literally export southern pine and ship it to like I don't know Guangzhou or something.
It's exotic.
Yeah, it's like exotic southern pine. It's which is really strange to me, but
we use it to study the interior walls and stuff. We don't even see.
It's like I'm sure I have pine somewhere in this house, but it's not. But yeah, they probably expose it and everything. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so this is actually my dad's land. So we started harvesting. So this is what they're going to turn to pulpwood. So as you can see, these trees are like kind of like skinny and just a bunch of branches on there. These machines are absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that is amazing.
I can literally sit here all day and watch it.
Yeah. So we have a.
Okay, all right.
we have this on a miniature scale up at my parents' cabin. Me and my dad will chop down little trees and just like the little baby ones so they don't grow too high and kind of block the view and stuff. And we have a tiny little chipper we'll throw them all into and just mulch the driveway with. But this is just taking a full tree and just craning that up, like 10 at a time.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh, you'll see even.
But my dad would be jealous. He wants one of those machines.
Where did you say your dad lives?
He lives in Alameda, but we're up at Bucks Lake.
Okay.
Sierra Nevadas. And so we'll do some mini forestry work up there.
That's kind of cool.
Don't post this online because we might get in trouble with the Forest Service. No, I'm just kidding. They're small, they're just they're baby trees.
Yeah.
We'll bleep that out.
I actually love, like someday I'm going to retire on a tree farm.
Yeah.
Just mark my words. Yeah. So this is harvesting, like a higher grade of wood. So this is like saw timber, or maybe it's poles. But you can see like this thing just like really cuts it.
That is.
Wow.
My dad.
So it actually strips the branches.
Yeah, it's limiting the
Can you full screen it?
Okay.
It
wanna
looks
see the
like
picture.
shredding paper.
Looks like what?
It looks like shredding paper.
It's like a
so
toy.
simple.
Yeah. No, you should see like how productive these guys are. Like with one guy with one machine in one day, like how much wood they can harvest, it's kind of ridiculous. Oh yeah, so this is an example of like, this is a tall tree, we're just gonna cut it.
kind of ground.
Yeah, so this guy, like, I watched this guy for like at least an hour, and he's just like clearing trees like it's nothing. It's pretty awesome.
And that guy's like, why is that dude staring at me? You're creeping up right now.
This is so cool because I know you mostly as like a business owner programmer, but seeing you so passionate about something that I didn't know you were so passionate about, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I grew up in Georgia. This is the teeth that they used to, that didn't work.
Wow, that's great.
So you said
you're tripping.
What's that?
you said your dad bought the land and he wasn't intending to do any farming, tree farming there, or was he initially?
No, so he actually raises as a hobby. So my dad's a doctor.
Yeah.
He's a pediatrician, but he raises catfish as for
Oh,
fun.
nice.
So I'll show you Google Maps of it. Well, actually, I'll show you some of these pictures.
What happens to the root? Do you just leave the root?
Okay, yeah. So the tree stump. There's actually a tree stump harvester. Yeah, so you can actually come by and just sell those too. You can there's basically like a market for just about anything.
Like,
Sean, sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry.
It's like a huge machine, and it just like it
Like
sucks it.
pulling a carrot out.
Yeah, it's like pulling a carrot. Exactly. Yeah.
What do
It's-
they do with the tree stumps?
I don't know. There is a tree stump in my house, like there. Like,
Yeah.
It's painted black. So maybe CB2 buys it.
Isn't it the Dorian Deep?
It does. Yeah, it gets go really.
The tap roots.
Pull it off.
I've seen it before. Basically it just goes over the whole thing and it just like sucks it up and there's a hole in there. And just like harvest it. So I mean they could just chip it. They could probably like throw it, turn it into like biomass. Because basically the reason why the biomass market exists is because there's a bunch of factories nearby, and essentially it's just cheaper for them to burn this stuff than it is to like burn fuel.
Yeah.
Right. And so biomass, especially if you have local like forest, like product, then it's a pretty competitive product to like gasoline. Yeah, so this is like.
What happens to the land then? So now there's like all these like pock marks all over the property, right? Do you fill it up again with soil? Do you just let it, like, let the rain like eventually? Like,
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know. I think they probably till it, and then actually I don't know if they till it. That's a lot of land to till, but I'd imagine honestly nature just does its thing. It just eventually dies, dries up or something, and you just like plant. Yeah.
so you bring people to plant more trees.
Yes. Yeah. So there are two ways to plant it. Like one is like by machine, right? If you look at like the light tree farms that are super straight, those are all machine planted.
Do you, Sorry to interrupt. Do you plant like smaller? Do you bring in small trees and put them in, or do you start from seeds when you replant?
You start from seedling.
Oh wow. Oh,
Yeah.
seedlings. So
Seedling.
little baby ones.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they've experimented also with seeds before, but yeah, they've just done a lot of like testing, and seedling is the best survival rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because yeah, I mean, if you do seedling, let's say survival rate maybe like 90%, but if you do seeds, maybe it's like 70 or whatever it is. So sometimes they'll just like spread a bunch more. Like
Well, it makes more sense because if you do a seed, you have no idea if it's going to grow like from there. But you already have. It's so easy to get a tree to this big that you can just bring it in, and it's not expensive, like that much more expensive.
Yeah.
So
And you should see the machines for these things that they plant. It's just like there's like one guy on the back of a machine, and he's just like feeding this like line of seedlings, and this machine's just like yeah, it's like printing these like trees. It's pretty awesome.
So if you start from the seedling, how long does it take before it grows to something you can sell?
Something you can sell 25 years.
So, I mean, because you were talking about pulpwood and you clearing things out. So if you have to wait, do you have to wait 25 years, or are you able to start getting returns on it early?
Well, they dug it. So in terms of land, let's say specifically for my dad's land, right? There are different revenue streams that you can do. So one is like hunting revenue. So that essentially just covers the cost of tax. So in Georgia, you can actually apply your land. You can sign up to say that your land is like a conservatory, which basically just lowers the taxes. And it basically just says like, hey, we're not going to use this land for any kind of like commercial development, right? So yeah, we're not going to like create shopping centers and stuff. And so we're just going to like have trees. And so it lowers your taxes. Can't remember what the taxes are per acre, but let's say for hunting, right, you can rent out, let's say so depending on how much game is on your land. So some people can, like, they'll actually purposely like plant like, let's say corn, or they'll plant like wild oats or something, I don't know, whatever pigs and deer eat. And you can actually make it into much more attractive land for hunters, right? So that's a route that you can go. And so if you have like really good land for hunting, you can probably rent it out for, let's say, like $45 per acre per year, right? For like really good land. And out in Athens, I saw some of that land, and they have these like patches where they just plant corn. It says wild corn. Well, I guess it's not wild because it's planted, but yeah, they plant it there, and then like naturally a lot of like animals will go there, right?
Okay.
But in terms of like timber, right? Like, so you have the management cut, which is like you go and you clear all the the brush and everything, and maybe you might do that every 7 years, right, or every 3 years, something like that. And so you can get a residual income from there. But then the final harvest is, let's say, depending on how productive your land is, maybe like $2,500 per acre to $4,000 per acre. So if you've got really good land, then $4,000 an acre or higher.
So generally, your revenue stream is it's very little until the 5-year mark, and then you reap all your benefits.
Right. Yeah. And it depends on your perspective too. Actually, can someone let Catherine in? Hey, how's it going? Okay. All right. Someone come let you in. Okay. Well, I'll let you in. All right. Bye.
You want to learn or?
No. The buzz. Yeah. Thanks, Vincent.
There's no way to buzz the.
There is usually, but it's broken for whatever reason. Yeah. But what were we talking about? We were talking about
Revenue stream.
Hunting revenue streams.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's a long wait, right? But if
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? It depends on if you want cash flow or not.
Yeah.
Right? Like, obviously timberland is, people who own timberland are not necessarily looking for like, like a rent payment every month, right? I mean, like if I wanted that, I just buy some real estate, right? But the fact is, like, you can literally leave land there for like years, like 10 years, and it's like, oh, cool, like, 6 to 8% per year, okay, cool. Like, you didn't have to do anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's very low maintenance. So you're not like, you don't have to like evict trees or anything like that. It's pretty low maintenance, right? So yeah, so that's one big like advantage of like having timberland. But it's also the whole like capital gains 1031 exchange, so it's very tax advantage, right? But it's also that like having a thriving tree industry, the thing is, it actually is good for the environment too, right? Because you're actually like replenishing the resources that you're using, right? Versus, basically if you look at like certain economies, right? Like, why did China ban logging? Well, because whatever they're doing is not sustainable. They're literally, it's like clearing the forest and they're not like replanting fast enough, right? Yeah. And so when you have like an economy that's actually doing it well, there's multiple parties involved, investors that care about the return, right? Then it creates this economy where it actually works, right? So, so let me show you a map. So this is actually really cool. All right, so this is my dad's land right here. So this is 190 Taylor. All right. So you can see like from the satellite image, right? This is like, there's like some trees, but it's not like super impressive, right? Once I started learning about timber, here's what I found. So this is the neighbor's land.
Wow.
You notice the rows?
Yes.
It's like literally, it's all timber farm,
Yeah.
right? And so like, and actually, if you just look everywhere, like there's timber farms everywhere, right? So it's really cool. Like if you actually I'll show you. So like one of the most productive parts. So the Panhandle is actually one of the most productive parts for pine. So they mostly sell like long leaf pine, right? So if you zoom in here, like, hey, how's it going? This is Catherine, everyone. Hello. Okay, so I'm just gonna zoom in on like some. Yeah. Anyways, you can see that a lot of them are actually. I was actually just like doing this whole like Google Earth image search, but if you actually just look at like most of Georgia, and especially right around the coast, it's very productive land for pine. And so I actually convinced my parents to to come with me to see some of these like amazing pine farms, because like my vision for their land is basically to have this amazingly productive like pine, right? And so.
Sorry.
What's that?
I remember last time this happened too. So my vision for their land basically is to turn this into, what is it? To basically turn this massive gray stuff into essentially this, right?
Wow.
This is what I want. So I want to be able to see 1,000 acres of this.
Can you just kind of, with the pointer, go over where the land actually is that your dad owns, just so I can see the scale compared to the one that you're showing me?
Yeah, sure. If I actually went to the county records, I could do it.
Just asked him.
Yeah, but I would say, okay, so this is like this is actually my dad's catfish lakes.
Oh wow, so that big.
Yeah, so these are this is like a 25-acre lake, this is like a 15-acre lake.
Yeah.
So they actually like raise the baby catfish here, and they drain it into the main one.
Okay.
Yeah, but catfish is, I would say it's not a great, it's not a great investment.
It's not as good as timber.
What's that?
Not as good as timber.
Not as good as timber, yeah. You're talking about like 75 cents per pound or something like that.
So that would be just all green land eventually, is what you're saying you want to do.
That's what I want.
Wow.
That's what I want. Yeah, because you can see some of it here, like some of it is actually really rich land.
Yeah.
It's because if you're next to a creek, well, actually next to a creek, by the way, is not necessarily where you're going to get the best pine, because next to a creek, typically, creeks are usually lower elevation. All the minerals flow downwards. You got a lot more water. So actually, hardwood is mostly around creeks. So actually, if you look at these creeks, right, there's no pine around it. You don't see any. It's all like hardwood, right? But in any case, like a lot of like the best land, like let's say right by the highway, or like right by these like random roads, like you're going to lower your transportation cost. It's going to be a lot easier for people to come in and actually harvest this stuff. That land is typically cheaper because people want more privacy. So there's a lot of reasons why land can be cheap, right? And if you're thinking about timber, then you can end up, you can probably acquire land that's pretty cheap and grow it. So, yeah. Anyways, when I was in Athens, like they were saying, like if you can acquire land for this like $1,000 per acre, $1,500 per acre, that's pretty good, price for timberland, right? So, yeah. You guys have any more questions?
What is the returns compared to like some other type of farm? Like, I don't know, almonds.
Almond farms? I actually looked at a PPM of an almond farm recently, and yeah, they were like getting hammered. But like, actually, a lot of you know how like California has a drought, right?
So when I hear ppm, I think parts per million. What does ppm mean?
Oh, PPM means private.
Placement memorandum.
Yeah, private placement memorandum.
So what does that mean?
So it's.
Do you want me to explain it?
Yeah.
So this thing basically is the documents you sign when you like get into a private placement, which is like offering. So like when like an offering can be anything, stocks, debt, bonds, anything.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've looked at a lot of PPMs for, let's say, like marijuana farms, almond farms, right? You have like corn, right? I mean, like if you look at like the way they plant corn, it's the same thing. I mean, you go to a farm. Well, so let's say you have the land and you're renting out to a farmer, right? Well, what is the cost of that rent, or what's the rent that you can demand? Well, it depends on the productivity of your farm. So they literally actually go out there, like so if I'm like buying like corn land, right? I would actually go out there and like measure how big the corn is, how many rows, and how many like kernels of corn or whatever I can like produce on per acre, right? And I just do an estimate and I see, okay, like I can yield this much, the price of corn is this much, okay, this is what the land is worth, right? So they do something very similar for like, let's say corn as timber. Timber is no different than any other farm, it's just trees. It's like it's basically just a really large plant that you're planting. That's essentially what it
But
is.
you really like the passive aspect of this, I think. That's the most appealing.
Yeah.
It's for the farm to be actively farming.
Well, I should say that for a farm, you're not doing the actual farming, your tenant is.
Yeah, I mean you're
Yeah.
leasing it, but still there's a lot more moving parts. It's much more actively managed. Whereas a timber farm, you plant it, 25 years later,
Yeah.
those guys harvest it in a couple days. They just come with their equipment. It's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if you're
You can wait 25 years. How do you figure?
Well, okay, so I want to also mention this whole 25-year thing. Like, so when I first mentioned to my parents, they're like, well, 25 years, I might not even be around. I mean, like, is this like a good? But the thing is, like, once you start the process of turning to timberland, right? The thing is, like, there's value in just having that there, right? Like, if you've got if you've got your entire, if it's like an entire farm and it's at like year 10, right? Well, if you're selling it to a timber investor, you can underwrite it based on that fact, right? So you're essentially like selling in bulk for the fact that there's already timber there, right? So either way, if you start the process, you're going to create a lot of value. And the cost of starting it is not that much compared to the eventual, the eventual price of it, right? But one thing I like about also timber is like, the whole 25-year thing is that you can, you can essentially time when you sell it, right? Because, like right now commodities have gotten hammered, right? But what's waiting another 5 years, right? They're still growing, right? So I mean, it's not like, you're not
losing cash flow while you're working.
Yeah. You're not losing cash. I mean, unless you're like leveraging the land or something, right? So that's, so it's really cool. I mean, like, so I think one thing that's really cool is just like reading widely. Like I never thought that I would get, like, honestly, I was just really curious. I'm like, what do these like endowments do? Like Harvard has $35 billion. What do they do with that money, right? Because last I checked, they didn't buy Vanguard, SP 500 and just sit on it. Like that's not what they're doing, right? So if they're not doing that, what do they know that I don't, right? But I think one thing about exploring these kind of things is that one thing I love about investing is that it creates a context for a lot of things to be relevant, right? I never thought I would like contact a forester and start cutting trees and film it and give a talk about it. Like, yeah, that's crazy, right? But the thing is that because investing gives this context for talking about it, right? It becomes really interesting. Yeah. And there's actually a lot of other alternative assets that I've actually invested in too. But I can say that for another talk. Timber is actually,
I think we'd all love to hear that.
really interesting.
Yeah.
Can you get a sneak preview? What alternative things you're investing in?
There's a lot of interesting ones, yeah. I mean, I read a really good book called Investing in Justice, Max Wolski. And it's all about litigation funding, right? So that's a really interesting asset class too, because there are a lot of there are a lot of situations, let's say in court, where the plaintiff can be in a compromised position, let's say like a motor vehicle accident, right? So you get an accident, you're not able to work, you're probably going to settle for a lot less than what you could get, right? So you might settle out of court with an insurance company for $10,000, but maybe the full settlement will be like $100,000 if you went through the entire court system, right? And so you can like take a loan against a lot of these cases, and so you can provide, let's say, a portfolio that's like 300 cases, right? Where as they get resolved, you get cash flow.
Jason, can I invite you to my next seminar. You should just be a teacher. I do this type of stuff, and he is just like, well, I do this. I am like, you're the best teacher. I should just get you to talk to my clients. Yeah, because we do litigation finance as well.
Oh yeah.
I do all kinds of alternatives. So like it's kind of funny to hear like this is like, oh my god, this is great. You're like doing my job really well.
So she runs a company called Market X. Which, do you want to explain what it is?
Oh, it's just what I just said, like alternatives, but we do like litigation finance, real estate, all kinds of interesting stuff, but we mainly do like pre-IPO investing, so like Airbnb, SpaceX, but a lot of Chinese pre-IPO names as well, like Tencent Music and stuff. But I also do some arts and film financing, which is like, I think it's the fun part, so anyway,
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I'm curious, after this talk, who wants to invest in timber?
I was going to do a house in SF, but then I don't know.
Is there liquidity, not much liquidity, where a lot of property exchanges hands? So like say you're 10 years in, but you want to liquidate, I mean, is there a buyer at the 10-year mark? Or is there not much equity? Mostly it's just
I would imagine no, but now that you mention it, I wonder if there are areas of specialty finance where you can actually get liquidity from your standing timber.
Yeah.
Right? That could actually be a really interesting opportunity.
Yeah.
We should look into that. Yeah, because I mean, if I've got like, let's say $5 million of value in this land, right,
exactly.
and I'm not able to cash out on it or leverage it anyway, well, part of that is because like maybe there's no financial product that's structured in a way that makes sense, right? But anyway, I mean, in the same way, like banks don't lend on a lot of different kinds of assets, right? So why don't banks do like litigation funding? Well, because they don't have a panel of lawyers underwriting this stuff for them, right? So it has to be a specialty area, right? There are other really interesting pockets of opportunity. Like if you look at fix and flip lending, so essentially like if you want to do like fix and flip real estate, right? You typically don't go to so like you want to buy like an ugly house, turn it into a pretty house, right? Well, typically banks don't lend on that. Why is that? Because like banks want to lend on cash flow. So banks want to see that, okay, like there's a tenant in there, it's producing cash flow. From the cash flow, they can service my debt, right? They can service their debt, and thus I minimize my own risk, right? So the project itself can support the loan I'm giving, right? So banks are very conservative in that regard, and so that's why it creates this pocket of opportunity for other kinds of alternative lending. Does it mean it's more risky? Who knows, right? It depends on how you're, if you define risk as volatility, if you define risk as like, is it collateralized? Like, there's a lot of like ways to define it, right? But if you look at like fix and flip lending, you can get something like 10 to 12%, on like a fix and flip loan, which is let's say like a 12 to 18 month loan, balloon payment at the end, amortized over 30 years. You can get something like that for 10 to 12%, right? And you're lending, let's say like there's like a $500,000 home, but you're giving them, you're lending on, let's say 60% of that value, right? So you can find situations like that. So you're lending, $300,000 on a $500,000 home, and if it doesn't work out, then you take the home back, right? It's collateralized. So I mean, there are a lot of different situations like that where because banks don't actually offer this service, it opens this pocket of opportunity.
I think there's an opportunity too in certain regulated markets like China where you could lock in the price of that utility potentially if you could create some sort of token-based economy.
Crypto.
That is a great segue for
You
it.
could have a timber coin lock in the price of that utility, right? And the owner could take that liquidity event. And someone in China could lock in because you could expect the price of timber might go up.
Yeah, that's
Because
true.
the government just said that we can no longer harvest trees because you clear cut and we're idiots. So I mean, just like things like that. You can really think about opportunities.
And there are other ways. I mean, granted, there are other ways to getting exposed to timber too. I mean, like you can buy a timber REIT, right? So do you guys know what a REIT is?
Yeah.
It's a
Real estate investment trust.
yeah, it's a real estate investment trust, right? It's like essentially a stock that like a share of a stock that you can buy, right? But yeah, so you can get exposed to timber from REITs, but there are a lot of like disadvantages of that too. Like the thing is like when you're buying this stuff directly, at the end of the year you're submitting a K1, right? And so you can like write off depreciation and like expenses on the stuff. If you're doing it from like a REIT, you're getting a 1099 div. It's not that tax advantage, right? So there are a lot of also the way I see it, public markets are a way to exit for a lot of companies, right? So like if you think about like if you buy let's say like like if you buy things privately, right? A lot of times they're trading on some multiple of the revenue, right? Well, why do people go public? Well, because if in the private markets, let's say this house, right? Let's say I'm buying it for like 10 times the revenue on it, right? But let's say suddenly I buy it in a stock, maybe that stock is 20 or 30 times the multiple, right? So as an exit, it's their best advantage, right? So as a consumer, when you're buying a stock, you're essentially buying the highest price for whatever that thing is. And that's why sometimes in private markets you can find better deals. Yeah.
So if you asked if people were interested in investing in timber, my kind of response to that would be, initially I would want to invest in cash flow properties, so I have the cash flow, and then invest in the timber. But I feel like that's almost backwards, because the timber you'd want to have that land to be working on it for the long term so that it's producing, and then work on your cash flow. What is your thought on like the order that you would go about, or do both at the same time, just smaller scale?
Yeah, I would say, like a lot of these illiquid, essentially a lot of times when you're buying illiquid stuff, right, it's because cash flow is not really an issue, right?
Yeah, so focus on cash flow first, and then...
But it's also that if you have enough timber, then you have enough cash flow. So a lot of these guys that I met at the timber conference, they own a lot of land. I mean, I'm talking about like 3,000 acres or more. So like every year they're harvesting, it's like a constant stream of revenue. Right, and maybe they pass it down for generations. So, and the thing is, like, they're not worrying day to day whether the trees are growing well or not. That's not something you think about on a day to day scale, right? Like, it's not like I'm logging into Coinbase and checking out the price of Ethereum today, right? Like, it's very like low stress kind of situation. So, I mean, and obviously there are things that can go wrong too. I mean, historically there are different kind of diseases for trees. There's different pests, right? Like there's the southern pine beetle, which is like one of the biggest. So from like I read that from 1960 to 1990, it destroyed almost $1 billion worth of trees in the south. So they had to like do a lot to contain it.
That's crazy.
But you look at the history of any crop, and that's what happens. Here's like a little fun fact. You guys ever go to like you guys ever go to like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and you see like the exact same banana every time, right? You ever wonder why we eat the exact same banana?
Chiquita?
It's engineered.
That's the brand.
Chiquita. For yield, is it yield? They've optimized the yield.
Yeah, it's optimized for economic yield. Right? It's not optimized for taste.
No.
Like you ever go to like Indonesia and go to an actual banana farm? That banana tastes amazing, and there's seeds in it. It's like I've never eaten a banana with a seed in it, and it's like, wow, this is an amazing banana. There's like complexity to the flavor, right? Like my first time in Indonesia, I was just like, why is this not in every Whole Foods? And the answer is because it doesn't survive in a shipping container for a month, right? That's the reason, right? But if you look at the diseases that come from bananas, right? Like we had a completely different banana before the 1950s because that species died off. So the current one is called Cavendish, and since the 1950s, that's what we've been eating.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And you see that with wine too. So there's a pest called phylloxera. So if you look at like wine, I don't remember how long ago, but it's probably at least 100 years ago. It wiped out most of like the vineyards in like France, so phylloxera is like a pest of vine. It's like this little bug that basically eats the roots of these like vine trees, right? And so they basically created vines that would produce this sap, and that sap would block the mouth of the phylloxera. Right. And if you look at trees, it's the same thing. Why do trees produce sap? Well, the reason is because the sap actually makes it really difficult for beetles and stuff like that to eat it. So if you look at a lot of these pine trees, they're just like seeping with sap. You touch it and you get it on your hand and everything, right?
If I found a bunch of those trees, I would find the bug that just wipes out those type of trees and just deploy that as a weaponize it, deploy in certain markets to take down supply so they drive price up. You know what I mean?
Like the Rockefeller of I'll be the Rockefeller of like pine trees. It's like go on your land and release some.
You'll own all the pine.
Nick, we got that all on camera.
I was about to make a funny joke, so I won't do that. No, your tree hole.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
How would they be able to track it back to you?
They wouldn't.
It's a bug.
And YouTube.
And you too, yes.
You gotta take off that dark jacket when you're saying things like that.
I'm definitely down. This timber thing sounds great.
Yeah. Oh, actually, if you want shorter cycles, you can actually plant Christmas trees. It's pretty profitable. Yeah, I think the official name is like Virginia pine or something. Like I have to look it up, but yeah, it's a shorter cycle. So a lot of these guys, a lot of these farms, they'll do different varieties too. So depending on where you are.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When are we going hunting?
I think the next one should just be in the middle of the timber forest.
Yeah.